name's Randall. I am a middle school substitute teacher.
My name's Michelle and I'm an urban planner.
Hi, my name is Grace and I am an analyst with one of the universities in town.
Hi, I'm Susie and I'm a librarian.
A one-bedroom garage apartment. So it'll be 10 years in June.
So we own a duplex and we bought it in, I want to say 2014, so 6 years now.
I own a house with a garage apartment, and the apartment is on top of a two-car garage. And basically half of the apartment is a living space for bedroom and living area. A quarter of it is the kitchen. There are 2 closets and the remaining piece is a bathroom.
So I don't live in a garage apartment anymore, but for 2 to 3 years, or maybe it was 4 years, I lived in a garage apartment just north of UNT, an efficiency style. So it had the main living space, separated bathroom, and then sort of a semi-separated small kitchen and a walk-in closet.
This was the move back to Texas after being out of state for 20 years, and just happened as just a chance drive-by, just a kind of a drive through Denton, and saw that these types of units were available, and I kind of decided that this is what I was looking for and landed here.
So we chose to buy a duplex as honestly part of a retirement strategy. We know that this would bring in a little cash income once the mortgage is paid off, so we thought that we would do that as part of diversifying for retirement. We lived in the duplex for several years, and we really enjoyed that as well.
This unit was with the house when I purchased it in 2002, and so it was already built and working as an apartment.
During most of my schooling, I had several roommates, so I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 of us total. I lived in a 3-bedroom house with 4 people total, including myself, a couple of times. I got a full-time job finally, and I finally could afford a place by myself without multiple roommates. And apartments even then were fairly expensive, and so this was more affordable for me to be able to have my own space.
Detachment, I mean, nobody touches me. I'm not in a multi-unit structure. I like having windows on all 4 walls.
It gives everybody a sense of privacy, but a sense of being in a home rather than, an apartment complex.
For us, we actually bought 2 other duplexes in Denton that we also rent out because, again, it's part of kind of our retirement portfolio. And so for us, we're not looking at, cash flowing a lot of money and living off that now. It's just a couple units, but it is a long-term vision for us to live on in retirement and to have something for our children.
My renter right now told me that their former place had just 1 window in it in a big apartment complex, and now it's like living in a treehouse.
Living in the duplex was great, particularly this one because it faced a park.
For that person who was here for 15 years, it was nice, it was comforting to have a nice neighbor who had eyes on the property and who was here at different times and could look after things. Sometimes would look after our pets if we were out of town. And there is a little added income, but it's just a nice feeling to, be able to help someone out.
So for me, the benefits of living in a garage apartment were that I liked how many windows I had. I could open the blinds and just have it so bright in there. There were windows on every side. When the weather was nice, I could open all of the windows and get a really nice cross breeze. And I just liked that I was close to where I needed to be, that I didn't have to use a car for every single trip that I needed to make. And I liked that it was affordable compared to apartments and compared to rental houses, and it didn't require me having any roommates. If I needed anything, I could just contact the owners who were on the same property.
Originally, we were not going to rent it out at all, and we just planned to have it for friends or relatives who dropped in or use it for storage. But people lined up wanting to rent it.
One of our first tenants was actually a lady that had always lived in this neighborhood, raised her family in this neighborhood, but wanted to downsize after her husband passed. And it was great because she moved in here and she was still able to maintain all of her friendships, go on the same walks with her neighbors that she used to. So it was that aging in place kind of things that this duplex made available.
For the most part, they've been either students or musicians or students who are also musicians. I had a renter for 15 years. He was a musician and a friend of the family, and just it worked out for him.
And then we had one tenant actually who worked there's some offices just up the street, and he was able to walk to work from the duplex.
The first person who lived here, someone approached me and asked me if her student could live in the apartment.
I think part of the thing is we get to know our tenants, and so oftentimes we'll rent to people that maybe don't have the best credit, but there's like good explanations, like there was a health issue or a recent divorce, and so it might not be something that a chain multifamily would rent to them based on that credit, but we know them as persons, we can meet them, interact with them, decide we trust them, and then kind of form that relationship, which is nice.
Hello. Hey, thanks, Drew, for that great presentation. We really appreciate that. Um, I'm Eric Pruitt. I'm here to try to stand back and listen to the panel in a little bit, but I wanted to provide just a um, uh, few ways to bring it down really local. So here is a map that you might recognize with a lot of our highways and roads that get clogged up sometimes. But just a quick overview. These are sort of the colored parcels are, as Drew talked about, in our zoning code. We have mostly a use-based zoning code. It does have some requirements that are more form-based, but it's not really a completely form-based code. And so this is showing you the parcels that allow people to build some of these types of homes that Drew was talking about, be it duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, other things like that. And by right is just a term that means that if you own the land, then as long as you abide by certain requirements in the building code, you have the right to build that type of structure. So as you can see, there's some areas around UNT and TWU where that's possible. And then there's, some little places that are, entire small subdivisions that were built with smaller lots that have this capability. But the majority of our land where all our homes are, we don't allow building these types of homes. But then, and this next view is not exhaustive, but this is sort of a crowdsourced view of where these types of properties actually are. It's a little bit hard to see, but the as you can see, when Drew was talking about how spread out and sort of diverse is a community versus being a single building type development, you can see in the area north of UNT here and north of downtown, it's very historically diverse, even though much of that area you can't build those building types right now. But then there's a few areas outside of, a little bit further out where there's clumps where a developer came in and built a certain number of units, but they're not distributed within the neighborhood. And then another thing just to keep in mind as we talk, there's a lot too much information on here, but essentially there, within our code, staff has came back in November and proposed a few changes to what requirements we have to fulfill in order to be able to build an accessory dwelling unit, which you mentioned, which is just that smaller unit that you could build in your backyard, basically. And these things are scheduled or are up for change, and based on some of the things that were brought up in the Affordable Housing Assessment Report, they're going to modify these and come back to council in the future. But this is something to keep an eye on. So with that, I will ask for the panel to come up and be able to ask some questions. So on the panel, as they're coming up, I'll just say who we have. We have Jacob Moses, who is the Executive Director of Denton Affordable Housing Corporation. We have Lauren Fisher, who is an Assistant Professor of Public Administration and Urban Planning at UNT. We have Roger Yale, who's a local small developer, focuses on some incremental infill projects like Drew was talking about. And then we also have Nicole Jocelyn, who's the Executive Director at Community Powered Workshop. So I think we are all here now. I guess in that same order, let me just ask you all to say a few things about who you are, how you got interested in this, and what you hope to see in the future. So I'll start with you, Jacob.
Yeah, my name is Jacob Moses. I'm the Executive Director at the Denton Affordable Housing Corporation, also known as DAC. And we develop and manage affordable housing units here in Denton, got about 91 total, through a few different mechanisms. About a third of our units are financed through HUD and receive subsidies. So the tenant pays, 30% of their income, and then HUD takes care of the rest. Second third of that are many of which are missing middle homes. You take a look at our portfolio at dentonhousing.com, a lot of duplexes and fourplexes in the game, but have received funding through the state and federal governments. And baked into those agreements are reserved for people who make certain brackets of the county's area median income. And then that last chunk, home on the private markets, but still below market rates based on us being property tax exempt, and then some very agreeable debt service with our lenders. So as DAC looks to continue to develop affordable housing, we're looking to get into this missing middle game, maybe not so much as, fronting the entirety of the construction costs, but looking at the existing multifamily properties we have here, getting a little bit of love from our lenders and the city, and just keeping at it. Very excited to be here.
Sounds great. Lauren, do you have where do you come from, and what's your role in this?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And thanks for inviting me to join you guys today for this discussion. So I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Texas. I teach in our program on urban planning and policy, which is a new program. We started about a year and a half ago. So we're currently training undergrads to think strategically about how we build communities, how we make sure we have kind of inclusivity built into design and regulations and affordability. I'm new to Texas, so I've done work up in the Midwest around Chicago, in New York, and lived in California for a while. This is one of the first times I'm living in a single family home, and I live in one of the communities that has a lot of missing middle housing, and I love it. It's a really walkable, accessible kind of community. We have a range of folks that live here, and it's a wonderful experience to have. And I would love to be supportive of Denton expanding those kind of housing opportunities throughout the city as we continue to grow.
Thanks. Roger, you have an introduction for yourself?
Sure. I got into this housing process because I own several commercial buildings generally around the courthouse on McKinney Street, and noticed that there were a lot of vacant lots between my offices and downtown, and generally north of McKinney, but some south of McKinney. That provided an opportunity to develop some single family houses. And then about 2 years ago, the planner that we used came and said, "Hey, you can build an ADU." So what's an ADU? And I found I could take a 7,500 square foot lot, and instead of building just a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house on there, I can add another 650 square foot, 1-bedroom, 1-bath house behind it, which we've done 6 or 7 of them at this point in time. And the 1-bedrooms rent well before they're finished. And the 3-bedroom, 2-baths also rent, but it's also a ability to help fill in the neighborhood that I think will flip from being a rough neighborhood in many respects, because the housing stock is built in the 40s and 50s to a place where people will want to live because you're within 5 to 10 blocks of downtown, which is a thriving square at this point in time.
Sounds great. Nicole?
Yeah, hey, I'm Nicole Jocelyn, Executive Director at Community Powered Workshop. We're a nonprofit architecture and planning organization based in Austin, Texas. And we work alongside communities to create equitable and powerful places. One of our primary programs and most longstanding programs is called the Alley Flat Initiative, where we provide architectural services and technical assistance to homeowners who are interested in building ADUs in their backyards. And the units that we help build participate in the city's affordable housing program. So we are able to access some benefits from the city to help somewhat subsidize those units to buy down a little bit of their affordability. And we really also look at the ADUs as an anti-displacement strategy also. So we're focused a lot in neighborhoods that are rapidly gentrifying and homeowners are feeling that displacement pressure and sort of seeing this as that secondary income source that might be able to help stabilize their housing costs a little bit. So in addition to doing architecture and planning work, we also do a lot of advocacy work for policy and regulatory changes in Austin, and then also, are available to other cities to talk about ADUs all day long. So that's why I'm here.
That's great. Thank you. It's I guess I'll kick this off by saying that that the city just received an affordable housing assessment report that I mentioned, and in it, one of their summary conclusions said that increasing the supply of smaller homeowner units like condos, townhomes, accessory dwelling units, duplexes, and triplexes could create affordable ownership opportunities without subsidy. So that's I'd like to kind of break that down a little bit and look at how that applies to Denton. So feel free to chime in whenever, but I guess my first question is, Drew talked a lot about the types of people that these types of homes could benefit, and how do you see that overlaying with a town like Denton that has 2 universities, that has a rich artist kind of scene and that kind of thing?
Well, I think Susie's testimony video really summarized it so well. First, substitute middle school teacher, been living in a garage apartment for 10 years. And then just as the stories followed, what really resonated with me, and I think aligns so much with the culture that we foster in Denton, is kind of this familial element to missing middle housing, especially with the duplex and the ADU. You had the woman that owns the duplex describing, some of her prospective applicants. If they were to be applying for housing through a traditional corporate developer, they may not check every box when it comes to maybe your income or your credit score. But as you get to know someone, you kind of pick up on the nuance of life and struggles one might experience, and still get these people housed. So that was one element in particular that really resonated with me, and I think is a must as we consider housing different types of populations here in Denton.
Yeah, I think the question too of expanding home ownership for people is incredibly important. Home ownership is the main way that Americans gain generational wealth, and giving people opportunity, particularly in a fast growing market like North Texas, to potentially invest in a property and kind of gain wealth to send their kids to college or to borrow against. I think that's a really kind of strong equity element to some of this missing middle, and even ADUs if you were to arrange it so that there's ownership potential or co-ownership potential.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess that brings me to another aspect of that action point that the report called for, and it talks about opportunities without subsidy. So can somebody talk to sort of what the broader range of affordable housing usually looks like, and why missing middle or missing middle plus some aspects of subsidy or assistance from public realm kind of is missing, if you will?
I can provide a little bit of background just from our work, but I think that Jacob probably has a lot more technical experience on the affordable housing finance side. But for us, I mean, ADUs are a lower cost construction type, as Drew shared. You know, this kind of missing middle housing, you're able to take advantage of, you know, more sort of typical single family type construction. You're able to build it a little bit faster. Whereas what we see, at least in Austin, a lot of the affordable housing is built in large apartment complexes, and a lot of the financing opportunities, a lot of the programs that do offer those kinds of subsidies are more steered towards that type of development, in addition to pressure from our land development code and availability of land and things like that for those types of developments to be. So we do see ADUs as a way to kind of get that gentle density and more gentle affordability. But I will say that affordability is relative, right? If you're talking about income restricted housing and you're trying to hit, you know, a 60% median family income household, you're going to still need some form of subsidy. And we've seen ADU programs across the country do that in different ways. You know, you could waive permit fees and save some costs on construction in that way. You could give low interest loans to make financing a little bit easier for the ADUs. So there are other than just like straight up buying down the cost of construction, there are other forms of subsidy that might be appropriate to ADUs that maybe aren't really the tools that you would use for typical affordable housing development.
Yeah, Eric, I think Nicole raises a great point. Even with missing middle housing on the lot level, sadly, with any new construction, it's not going to be affordable right off the bat. You know, you incur some serious building costs, especially when we're talking about parking minimums or any other requirement that the city may bestow on a developer that does need to be passed on to a resident. But with we see with missing middle housing, you know, the more units we can fit on a lot, basic economics, the more cost we can pass on to more residents. So if we adopt this missing middle housing approach on a neighborhood level, what we would hope to see is over time, we of course increase the supply and there is less competition for just a select number of units. DAC comes from, as Nicole mentioned, or the subsidized side of housing. So we're able to be a viable, self-sustaining organization because of a handful of subsidies, whether that's property tax exemption. Nicole mentioned low to non-existent interest rates for DAC, which is unique to our organization as a community housing development organization, or our actual projects being subsidized by HUD. It's a great asset to a community, but you also don't want a ton of DACs in your city because you need property tax revenue to fund schools and to maintain your streets. So the subsidized side is an essential part, including housing choice vouchers. But as Drew mentioned, like we need to embrace this missing middle side as well, so we can have more of that naturally occurring affordable housing that doesn't, you know, directly require subsidy off the front. You do have some cities subsidies on the missing middle side. I think the state of California has a bond program where they'll issue bonds to cities who will purchase existing multifamily missing middle properties, and then have a mix of incomes per the unit, so it's self-sustaining. Ben, Nicole is exactly right. For it to be affordable off the front, there often is some subsidy required.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to point out that our current regulations in Denton require that the ADU be 50% of the size of the main house. Many of the houses in the neighborhood where I work in between North McKinney Street, between Audra and downtown, are 40, 50 years old. They're 800 to 1,000 square feet. Nobody's going to go build an ADU that's 400 square feet. It just doesn't work. You can certainly build one that's 650 square feet and make that work as a one bedroom. But because of the regulation on the front end that you have to have a bigger main house, you are taking out a large portion of the population that could add an ADU to their house, making their house affordable.
Yeah, so I'd like to kind of hear some more about in Denton specifically. What are, how do you approach an opportunity, Roger, as far as what regulations guide what you're able to do with a piece of infill property that you'd love to provide some homes for? I think, we've talked about parking, we've talked about a number of things, and just for everybody watching, Denton right now requires basically 4 parking spaces per dwelling, for a single family home, or including a duplex as well. So for a duplex, I think they require 8 parking spaces just to
And
set the stage.
there are some different regulations for infill lots. What you're talking about is for new construction or in terms of a non-platted lot.
Okay.
When we look at a lot that's an infill lot, the first thing we look at to see is whether it's a lot and block, meaning it's already been planted in terms of that, or is it still meets and bounds? Otherwise, you're going to have to replat the lot. Then we look at the water. Are we in a flood zone, a floodplain? Is that going to be negatively affected? So much of what is in and around downtown will have a minimum finished floor elevation. So you have to understand whether or not you're going to have to bring in dirt or even get a letter of map revision from FEMA to get your property out of the floodplain. Then there's an awful lot of infrastructure that is existing in Denton in terms of water and sewer and electricity that just misses a spot here or there. So you need to see where you're going to put your utilities. But then the question is, what can you build there and what can you rent it for? Typically, the reason ADUs work, if we take a infill lot and you pay $50,000 for that infill lot and you're only able to build a single family home on it, you have about a 50% increased cost to the land as opposed to being able to also put an ADU on there. When you can put an ADU on there, that shares the cost of the land, reduces the overall per square foot cost to the building, and makes it somewhat more affordable.
Okay, thank you. Um, I guess a related question is, I see people asking about, what are developers going to build? What are people demanding? This whole demand versus supply or demand with supply question. I guess my question is, in areas where these types of homes, be it duplexes, triplexes, and ADUs, are harder to build or not able to be built because of zoning regulations, what happens in the market, right? How do builders then satisfy that demand? What types of things do they build if they can't build these places that we've been talking about?
I mean, I definitely think, Eric, that there's a risk if we don't make it easy to do infill development or encourage it. You're going to see a lot more of 2,600 square foot homes outside of walkable neighborhoods. I think just the pure square footage increase in the size of homes over the last 30 years as the number of average residents in a home has gone down considerably. I think that shows that the market isn't really keeping up with demand. I think that what's being built is shaping demand more than demand shaping what's being built. And I think to a certain extent that is because of regulations. In work I've done outside of Texas, it's also because developers aren't always comfortable trying something new. There's a lot of risk when it comes to infill development if you're a single family home developer and used to doing greenfield. So sometimes it also requires kind of introducing some new expertise or kind of new training with the developers who are actually providing some of the units.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'd like to turn a little bit to look at sort of some aspects of sustainability. We've talked about it a bunch of different ways, be it fiscal sustainability of the town, or some of the things Drew showed about how how much space you fill with roads and how large the lots are sort of impacts how much green space is left for community use and that sort of thing. How, are there other aspects of sustainability, or how do trees plan into this? what 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 issues typically come up in that realm? Like I know that Denton has a tree ordinance, right? And everybody's very thankful that we do because we can preserve some trees as development happens. But does it make certain infill lots not developable, for instance, or does does building larger multifamily units sort of push us to a situation where we don't have as much green space as we would if we built some of these more compact neighborhoods?
On
Roger, what's your
tree.
experience with street trees? I'm sorry.
Okay.
I know Roger's had his share of
If we can
tree shenanigans.
work through the trees, we certainly try and do that. The city has a mitigation, and I've spoken to two council folks about there ought to be some grace for a 7,500 square foot lot not needing a tree survey. It just adds another $600 to the cost of building, and eventually the tree is going to come out. It's a question of then do you have to pay an additional sum for the tree? It's pretty hard not to like trees. By the same token, they improve the value of the property, but if they're in the middle of the property where your foundation is going, it creates a problem. It's a balancing act.
We encounter we have a pretty strong tree protection ordinance in Austin as well. And we often are working on lots that have a protected tree. There are usually ways around it. I think that the more flexible your ordinances are and your land development code is to allow for that unit to like sort of, shape around the tree on the site, the better chance you have at being able to develop that unit and keeping the tree. So I think that, yeah, I agree. It is a balancing act, but we are usually able to work around it.
Eric, I guess perhaps another part of the environmental sustainability conversation is hopefully with this missing middle housing, reducing car trips, less of those emissions with the burning rubber from our vehicles. If we're able to increase the density of our neighborhoods, make it more viable for someone to, local entrepreneur wants to mess with a coffee shop or a corner store, primary care clinic, some of these basic neighborhood services, we would hope that would translate to more people, being able to live life on a neighborhood level, opt for the skateboard or the bicycle or on foot to achieve those day's needs, activities that may have required, a hop in the whip heading to university beforehand. So hopefully a long-term environmental impact as well.
Yeah, to play off what Jacob's saying too, there's something about us having two colleges and being able to plant seeds in terms of thinking about your lifestyle choices. There's some pretty good evidence out there that if people can maintain a non-motorized transport lifestyle through age 23 or 24, they're more likely to seek that out in their future and push for those kind of walkable, livable kind of developments. So I think if we're thinking about an opportunity to shape kind of 30, 40, 50 years down the road, not just in Denton, but elsewhere, this is a real opportunity for the city to consider.
Yeah, Lauren, can you explain sort of how the viability of transit goes along with a certain amount of density? I don't know if you're aware, but actually DCTA is considering eliminating most of the fixed route bus service and transitioning to an on-demand service. And, to a certain extent, that may benefit some people and it may be a detractor to others. But I think there's just a real, how does that interplay? What do you need to have a good transit service that is used a lot?
Yeah, you need two things. You need walkable, semi-dense communities, and you need transit that runs frequently to serve those communities. Here in Denton, I think as our speaker talked about, we do have a nice historic core. We invested heavily in a commuter train that a lot of students take up. It connects to DART. And so we do have some significant infrastructure that's in town. I won't get into DCTA's decision to go to all on-demand transit, which I think is very interesting. But we do know that if we want to move mass transit, if we want to move groups of people outside of private vehicles, then we do need a certain level of density. And I think the exciting thing is you don't need New York City density. You can look at the suburbs in Toronto and Melbourne and lots of other places that don't look all that different from the missing middle neighborhoods in Denton in terms of density. And you can still get enough ridership if the transit's reliable. And I think too, when we're thinking about transit, we really need to think about all types of mobility that aren't private automobiles. Because one of the things that it's not just good enough to do kind of transit, you have to provide that last mile connectivity. And a lot of that's provided in missing middle neighborhoods because of the sidewalks, because of the walkability, because of your ability to swing by the corner store on your way home and pick things up. All of those kind of elements of a neighborhood make transit viable and move us away from, only having one kind of major form of mobility.
Yeah, and to continue off what Lauren said, I love the approach with missing middle housing, how it complements the transit side, because it starts with just building a great place first. Like, let's first make our neighborhoods more livable, allow more different types of housing that welcome different types of incomes, open it up a little bit to maybe have some low density commercial. And once we beef up a place, we can include more of the transit. I mean, the neighborhood that Mr. Yale is working in, so much great potential there that is, blocks away from the DCTA stop over at East Hickory, and a long stretch of bus stops as well. So where do we already have some transit, and show some love by opening up some more housing types?
Okay. So I'd like to move in and incorporate a couple of listener questions we're getting, and also kind of understand and make it actionable to people. And I guess my question is, as we look toward how could Denton increase these types of homes that are available, what kind of codes have been found to work best for that? What type of things should elected or appointed officials, as well as city staff, be looking at as models of places that have tried to move from, really sort of a suburban outlying community like Denton that maybe has an old core downtown to something that has more of these neighborhoods than just one or two?
I would say in Austin, we transformed our ADU ordinance in 2015, and the main things that we changed were reducing the parking requirements. So now if you're within a quarter mile of a transit corridor, then you don't have to provide parking for the ADU at all. Most of the ADUs that we build do not have parking. And then we also increased the square footage that they were allowed to be. So I think that those two things, and since 2015, about I had the numbers, 85% of the ADUs built in Austin have been built since 2015. So, and we've had an ordinance in place that allowed them since 2006. So that's a big, and a lot of other things have changed in our housing market since then as well. But those were really impactful. I would say if you're going further up the missing middle spectrum, like we are trying to do in Austin, one of the biggest barriers that we're hitting up against is site plan requirements. If you're doing over a certain number of units, the regulations treat you like you might as well be doing a 100-unit apartment complex, and that process is really burdensome. And we're working to try to scale those things down to the scale of the development. But yeah, that's just sort of what we've seen here in Austin.
And I guess also, Jacob and certainly Roger, since you do a lot of work sort of in the east side of downtown and that area, how can we make sure that future missing middle housing, infill development, that sort of thing, improves the neighborhood as opposed to tearing down an old small house and just building a large unaffordable, 4,000 square foot home and that sort of thing. Is there risk of that sort of thing happening if the regulations don't allow more duplexes? And how do we guard against that?
I think
go ahead, Roger.
I don't think you're going to see McMansions being built in the neighborhood I work in, but I think you will see something that will be economically driven. If you take a perfectly good house that can be refurbished, that's 800 to 1,000 square feet, and allow somebody to build a 600 or 700 foot ADU, which exceeds the 50% ratio, you will see ADUs pop up in that neighborhood, and that will improve it. I think the parking regulation, an ADU is generally going to be one bedroom from what we're building, and one car is plenty. The visitor is going to park on the street. There's going to be an accommodation made with the main house. So I think that would be one aspect. There's a architectural magazine called Dwell that looked at an ADU that was built on Robertson Street, which is north of University. Very nice neighborhood. And the owner, who I don't know, commented, you thought we were building a mid-sized apartment complex to get it approved by the city of Denton. That's just a perception, and it's just Denton's going through some pains in terms of its development, and it's gotten better. The development staff and they're if you work with them, they will generally come back and work with you. They still don't understand the fact that the ADU and the main house have a single address. The fire department wants to have two addresses so they can identify where they are, and the regulations say it's a single address and a single mailbox. So it's a right-hand, left-hand problem to a certain extent. But again, if you don't like the regulations, don't build them down. Don't complain about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we we don't really have somebody on the panel that is a mortgage lender, unfortunately. But is anybody familiar with how HUD, FHA loans and that sort of thing overlays on top of these different types of homes that are not the typical single family detached home that we've been building for the last 30 years?
I think you can get an FHA loan if it's under 5 units. But after that, it won't qualify for an FHA loan if you are residing in the units, I believe. But I might be mistaken on that.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of homeowners. I mean, it depends on who you're talking about, the developer being, but a lot of homeowners here have had a lot of challenges finding financing, especially if you were relying on that rental income to qualify for the loan. You won't be able to get a loan with that projected income unless you have 2 years of rental history, which the unit's not built yet, you're not going to have. So we have seen that most ADUs are built by people who have access to some kind of savings, equity, those traditional products. So from the work that we do, the anti-displacement perspective, serving those lower moderate income households who are really at risk of being displaced, where that second source of income could be really helpful. There aren't a lot of financing tools available for them right now.
Okay. I guess, we talked about what sort of city officials or staff could do to move this conversation forward in Denton. What can residents do to try to support more of this vision? If we don't have deep pockets, but we and we're not elected, what's our role? What have you seen be successful in other areas?
I do think that there is a kind of strong mind shift that has to happen a little bit. When you look at Denton's comprehensive plan from 2015, we want everything. We want infill, we want affordability, we want ADUs, but we don't want them in all the neighborhoods where they work. And that kind of spatial disconnect, I think, in the policy is somewhat held up by people's perspectives on what multifamily housing is. And I think there is one conception of multifamily or subsidized or affordable as being undesirable neighborhoods. And I think fundamentally, if you're a resident of Denton, start talking about the benefits of a little bit more density and kind of how that looks. And it's not so scary because people invest a lot in property they own. They have a lot riding on the status quo. And I think there has to be kind of this mind shift to think differently about how our community is going to grow and to allay some of the fears that people have about change.
Thank you. And I guess a last sort of group of people that what can they do to make this happen would be maybe local developers or people who have thought about getting into development. What we talked a little bit about what from a regulation perspective we can do to help them be able to see what we might want in the town, but how can we get more of those local developers in Denton or interested in doing things in Denton?
I think you could take away the impact fees to build a single family house, 3 bedroom, 2 bath that's around 1,300 square feet, and a ADU that's 650 square feet. You're looking between $22,000 and $25,000 for the building permit before you scrape the dirt. That's around 7% of the entire cost, assuming a $100 a square foot build out.
Yeah, I guess just for the viewers, I'll point out that impact fees are really designed. They vary from state to state, but in Texas, they're designed to sort of offset the initial building costs of new infrastructure that a new resident might need in order to get around town and that sort of thing. But right now, Denton's impact fees, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but I believe they are independent of, they're the same in all areas of the town. So if you plat a new lot out at the outskirts, your impact fees are going to be the same as if you find an unbuilt lot in the middle of the town that already has all the roads and sewer and everything around it that it needs. Is that accurate?
Generally, if you find a lot and there was a house that maybe succumbed to fire or something else that came down, and it's been, I think within 2 years, there is not an impact fee, but generally there's an impact fee, whether it's an infill lot or a new build. You still have a park fee that associated with it, and then the impact fees seem to be a general mystery of how they're figured out, because I can have 2 lots and get different impact fees within a block of one another.
Here in Austin, we have a group of infill builders that have sort of organized under the banner of the Austin Infill Coalition, and they're really active in just pointing out these very critical flaws in the either codes or development process and procedures, and they hold a lot of weight in transforming, influencing policymakers to make changes that are logical based on the experience of actually developing on the ground. And they're really there to sort of provide that check and balance of, this is how we think this code might work, or the impact of this thing that we're doing might be in the policy land, but then to actually see it on the ground and to have a voice that says, hey, no, that's not what you meant to do. Maybe you need to change it this way. That's been really helpful here.
Yeah, I think it's important to note there too, whenever we're discussing the prospect of reducing impact fees for an infill developer, it's not, oh, now the greenfield developer is subsidizing the infill developer. Again, like Eric mentioned, all the infrastructure already exists, already got the street, already got the sewer. therefore, it makes sense that they would have a reduced impact fee.
Yeah.
I see there's an audience question whether greenfield developer fees ought to be raised and lower infill. I don't know that it's a balance of one versus the other, and I think that the city council has pretty significant discussions and thinks that all of the impact fees don't meet what the city needs in terms of the city infrastructure, and maybe everybody ought to be raised is one thought of some city council folks. Clearly it's a balance. How do we get the rooftops in place so the tax base is there, so the city can operate?
Yeah, I think that tax base is a real big consideration, right? Because one of the things that Strong Towns talks a lot about is let's run the numbers, right? Let's find out whether if the city develops with 10,000 new single family detached homes and 2,000 units of multifamily here and there, and we need this many more roads, how are we going to pay the bill 30 years from now when that road starts to deteriorate that the developer built, right? Who's going to pay to replace it, essentially? I guess to start to wrap it up, one thing that I'd like to ask is, when you look at Denton, how we have a lot of single family neighborhoods, we have a lot of historical neighborhoods. Ironically, some of the more historical neighborhoods are also the neighborhoods on that map that you saw that have more historical missing middle housing, right? Just because it was built 30 years ago or something. So how do you think we can have a conversation that says, hey, look, we used to do this. Everybody likes these neighborhoods, so maybe we should do more of them. What does that conversation look like?
Watching Susie's slideshow on repeat with her tune playing through our earbuds. No, it's, I think it's being very empathetic to people's concerns whenever new construction is proposed in their neighborhoods. Again, especially with the multifamily conversation, we do envision very transformative developments. If I've been looking out my bay windows, looking at the same single family homes for the entirety of my residency, and now you're saying you want to build a fourplex, my gut reaction is concern. I've seen the fourplexes. You have the parking up front, all those things that Drew mentioned. But I think if we just start to walk the block, discuss our concerns, but then propose that there is a better way to do it that not only improves the property values of our neighborhood, the chance to have some commercial in our neighborhood, but also meets a lot of these social factors that we all advocate for, I think it'd be a lovely place to start.
Yeah, I really like the idea of block walking there. Anybody else have anything you want to kind of wrap it up with that we haven't talked through that's just burning on your minds?
I guess I'll just say that I think one of the things about Denton to keep in mind is the population of the city is projected to almost double in the next 10 or 15 years. We're going to have to find a place to put those people, and we're going to have to find a place to put them for the next 75. And so really thinking strategically about the zones in the city that can densify currently and about the areas that can't. And I think as we move into revising the comprehensive plan for Denton, I think that it's a great opportunity for more people to come out. I'd love to see a developer coalition of infill developers. That would be awesome. So there's some opportunities that are kind of coming down the road for people to get out and have these conversations in a really structured way with facts and examples. And if we can come together as a community, it could be a starting point of something exciting.
That's interesting that you shared that, Lauren, about the population doubling, because we've had a lot of those conversations in Austin, and I feel like a lot of the community conversations that we've had, when you're laying out all the options on the table, it seems like people forever think that no change is an option. And that's sort of like always where we end up. And, you know, if Austin is at all a warning sign to you guys, no change is not an option. You're either going to be pushing people out, you're going to be increasing the housing costs of the stock that you have right now, even if it's not improving. There will be something that gives and a push that is made, and whether you can make changes now to control that and to point that in a direction that is healthy and beneficial for your community, or you just say, nope, if we don't let it happen, then it won't. That hasn't worked out very well for us, and
Sure.
a pretty extreme housing crisis right now in Austin. So
yeah, I don't think it's worked out for anyone, Nicole. I'd love to see an example in
maybe
history where people just ward off change. Yeah.
Yeah, ironically, the places that haven't changed very much are sort of the middle America place, where they're fighting different challenges, right? Where they need to keep people in their town and revitalize the places that they love. Otherwise, people keep moving away, and it's two sides of a coin, right? I mean, in Denton, we bemoan these development pressures and rising costs and everything. But the other possibility of everybody leaving is a very traumatic thing as well.
Sure.
So, well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time. Really appreciate Drew, and I hope that this can become sort of a launching point for more people in Denton thinking about these issues. So I'm just gonna show a little closing thing here. I will remind people that at Opticos they have this book. You can get it as an ebook or a print book if you like stuff on your coffee table. That really goes into a whole lot more detail about missing middle housing, and it's a great resource. And then I guess I'll just remind people that DAC, Denton Affordable Housing Corporation, does a lot of great things around our town. They're doing a Keep Denton Beautiful cleanup. They're doing some stuff like that. They help out a lot of the residents of their properties, and really have some great vision for how residents of these places like fourplexes and sixplexes can build a foundation for the future of their lives, essentially. I'll also mention that Stronger Denton is a group of people like Daniel mentioned, and feel free to follow on Facebook and whatnot, and keep tabs on some monthly meetups that we'll have. And then, as Lauren mentioned, there's a lot of stuff going on at the city right now. If you're more interested in the policy angle of all this, that there's some development code amendments coming. There's a big comprehensive plan update, et cetera. But then there's also opportunities if you're just wanting to, meet with your neighbors and say, hey, how can we make our street better, right? Can we plant some flowers here? Let's make this place a nice place to be, and move from there. So I thank everybody for your time, and we'll do it again sometime. So thank you for being interested.